Hi, Dr. Staples, can you hear me? I think I can hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you, which is weird.
¿Ahora?
There you go.
¿Ahora? Sí.
Yeah,
Escúchame.
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
But for some, yeah.
Lo siento. Fue preparando cocina para mis niñas. ¿Escucha?
Oh.
¿Escuchas?
Yes. Yo puedo escucharlo. ¿Usted me escucha?
Sí.
Oh, perfecto. Estoy sorprendido. Usted habla español.
Más o menos.
Wow. This is a bonus. Yo
no suficientemente para podcast and
I know.
live, pero
no worries.
pero suficiente para comunicar.
Exactly. Well, no worries, because we're gonna do it in English, okay? And let me explain you what's behind, because you asked me if I have read your book. No, I haven't read it. I wish I would. I want to devour the whole thing, because I mean it's the latest of your scholarship. But I have indeed read two of your, I can say, our most famous articles of yours, which is and that's the one that has to do with the Gentiles. What does it have to do with all Israel will be saved? That's the first one. And the other one is Vessels of Wrath,
right?
Which was published by Harvard Theological Review, if I'm not mistaken. So and what I'm going to say is this, Dr. Staples. Do you want me to address you, Dr. Staples?
Oh, just Jason's fine.
Oh, thank you. Okay. How can I say this? Okay, I am what's the word? I'm not sure if it's manager, but okay. As you know, in the Enoch seminar, we do have a Enoch seminar in Spanish Facebook group. So I am the guy, managing the whole thing. Gabriele Boccaccini talked to me, and he and some other committee members, they agreed to give me the responsibility to work through that. So I talked to him and I said, we need to, for this 2025, we need to do something else. We need to bring some new dynamics to the group, as it were. And I said, I'll be doing some interviews, and we're gonna translate those interviews into Spanish. Perhaps not the whole thing, because it takes a lot, but we can extract some bits, accurate sentences on concrete questions, and then we can share that content in the Enoch seminar in the Spanish Facebook group. So people who can speak English, they can have access to your work in their own language. So that's basically the whole purpose of this interview, Jason, which I appreciate, and thank you so much for that. Now, everybody, I'm going to say this in Spanish, okay? A todos los que están llegando ahorita, ¿verdad? Saludos, bienvenidos. Esta es la segunda entrevista con uno de los miembros del Enoch Seminar en español, ¿verdad? Quiero decir esto, ya se lo dije al doctor Staples ahorita, pero yo voy a estar traduciendo ciertas partes de esta entrevista al español para poder subirlos al canal de YouTube del Enoch Seminar en español. Entonces, esta es la segunda entrevista. La primera entrevista fue con el doctor Mark D. Nanos. Esta es la segunda. Y la tercera está todavía veremos, porque estoy pensando traer a Tyler Stewart para hablar de su trabajo también. Entonces, con eso dicho, Jason, I don't know if you have some questions, something, just before we can start the whole thing. You let me know.
No, gracias
go,
por
right?
la invitación.
Yeah.
Por la invitación.
No, I'm still in shock because I'm surprised you can. I mean, it's really understandable your Spanish, so that's great. That's nice. Yeah.
My great grandfather immigrated to the United States from Zacatecas.
Zacatecas, that's Mexico. It's
Sí.
Mexico. Yeah, Mexico. Okay. Let me see. I just wanna go back here. Give me just a moment. So yeah, I just want to make sure we have everything good to go. Give me just a moment. Let me see. Oh, there you go. So let's do it. All right. What happened? Okay, welcome back, everybody. We have a very special guest today. Well, here is tonight. I'm sure Jason he is in East time, so he's 1 hour after me. So yeah. So we have a special guest today. We have Dr. Jason Staples in the building. And we're gonna be talking about don't get rushed. Yes, I have those pictures of his two of his works, two of his books, most recent books, I can say. But we're gonna be talking about that one that you can see there, Paul, and the resurrection of Israel, which is phenomenal. Dr. Jason Staple, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for the invitation.
My pleasure. So just to get going here, I would like to introduce Dr. Jason Staple first. I want to go with the formalities here. And there are some surprises. First, he can speak a little Spanish, which is good. Trust me, that's something that I didn't expect. I just told him that. So I would like to introduce Jason A. Staple, PhD from UNC Chapel Hill. And yes, his supervisor was the one and only Bob Ehrman. Jason Staple is an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the NC State University, speaker, journalist, voice actor. Wow. Okay, I need to stop right there. Voice actor and former American football coach. How about that? Okay, voice actor. I'm very interested in that. I mean, that's good.
Got to find a way to make a living.
Gotta find a way to make a living. Yeah. Now, do you have some productions out there that we need to be aware of to check your work as a voice actor?
I've done some audiobooks mostly, and then a few advertisements here and there. Nothing major.
Okay. And what about the NFL? Am I right? NFL?
So not NFL. I played college football, and then I coached American football in high school, and then I've been covering college football in the media for about 17 years now.
Great. Yeah. I need to ask you because United States is not my context, as you can realize. But what's the biggest thing there? Basketball or NFL or baseball?
The NFL is definitely the biggest sport in terms of viewership and popularity in the United States. The other sports basically all kind of compete for second place at that point. The NFL has a very dominant position. After that, you could kind of argue for either the NBA or Major League Baseball as the next. But it would probably, my guess is probably be Major League Baseball. But the NBA playoffs, I think, outdraws Major League Baseball. So it's a little bit, it's pretty close with those two, from what I understand. But basically, NCAA or NFL football is number one, and then actually college football, NCAA football, it would be number two. The top division, college football, would actually be above the others generally as well. So, football, kind of American football, rules the roost in the United States, and then everything else is after that. Now, football, soccer has been very rapidly gaining in popularity, and if the United States ever starts to take a few steps forward in World Cup,
Yeah.
if they actually start to be competitive there, I think you're going to see that much more popularity. Partly because as the United States has gotten more affluent, you're seeing fewer parents who are willing to have their sons play tackle American football, and all of the contact with that is less popular with more affluent parents who are having their sons play soccer and other sports more often now than they used to when I was young. So I think you're starting to see some shifts with that, and American football is going to probably decline a little bit, but you are definitely seeing a big tick up in global football.
I'm inclined to ask you who's your favorite team, but I'm not sure if you want to.
I actually don't have. I actually, as far as NFL, I don't have a favorite team. When I was in college, I played with about 40 guys who went on to the NFL, and they all played on different teams at different times. And I wanted my friends basically to do well. And one of the things that competing at a high level does, and then especially once other people who are competing at that level does, is it does make you less inclined to root for laundry, to root for for the jersey that people are wearing instead of for the people themselves. So, I'm a little bit more inclined to cheer for people that I know and that I like than and for whatever teams they're part of than for specific colors or whatever. Now, I did go to and play at Florida State University in college, and so I do have some partiality there as well. And then I got my PhD at UNC and know a number of people in that department as well. And so, there's a certain degree of partiality to the organizations that you're closer to. But, if those places hire a person that I really do not like as a coach, or, just generally have programs where they're people that I don't believe in, I just can't root for those people. So, it's people above organizations. People matter more.
Yeah. Jason, this is something, I personally have great admiration for Bob Ehrman and his scholarship. So I need to ask you, I need to ask you about this. What was the experience to study and having him as a supervisor like?
Bart is he is terrific to work with as an advisor. He's
I'm surprised.
So first of all, obviously he's very knowledgeable about the whole field, and has a lot to give to his students in that department. But there are some other things that are really important as an advisor, and that he's very good at. One is, I think, partly because he's had so much success on his own, he's not threatened by students who have different opinions or different views or come to different perspectives on things once they once they've gone through the sources and all of that. He's not trying to create replicas of himself, or to basically force people to become like him. He wants you to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And that is that's something that, he's going to demand that you make the best possible arguments, that you be very sharp in the kinds of things that you're going to argue, but he doesn't require, he doesn't expect that everybody's going to agree on everything. He understands how scholarship works. And like I said, because he, I think is successful on his own side, he doesn't feel the need to convince his students to, come over and to all of his views. He wants you to research and become your own scholar. So that's very good. And for someone like me, that was very important. He gave me enough rope to, really explore and to do the best that I could to push the envelope in my own research. And he just gets interested in what you're doing. And then follows along with that, even if it's not in an area that he's as strong. And his other thing is he's one of the best writers in the field. And his students all,
I agree.
He puts very high demands on his students for writing understandable and readable prose. So I think everybody who works under him becomes a better writer because of it. And so that's another real positive. And then, he is exceedingly generous. I think a lot of people out there who, just sort of know Bart from various media appearances and so on, don't really realize how generous he is with both his money and his time. And, he deserves a lot more credit for that than I think he often gets. I have a lot of respect for Bart and I think, like I said, he, in a lot of ways was very much an ideal advisor, someone to work with. And anybody who would want to be very good at what they do in this field, it'd be hard to find someone who's better at helping people become good at that. And to do so without, again, trying to force them to become something specific. It'd be hard to find somebody better than Bart.
This is true confessions right now, Jason, because I mean, I'm a confessional Christian, but I have been taught to exercise critical thinking when it comes to faith matters and religious stuff. So I was very early on when I started my journey. I'm not an academic, and nor I pretend to be one, but I am what John J. Collins calls an educated non-specialist. That's what I am. So I was very early on in my church context here in Honduras, Central America. I was discouraged to read anything that had to do with urban, and I won't go even further to say because there are very not pleasant things to remind. But I was very discouraged. But since I was taught to read those who don't really think about the same religious faith things, just like me, sharing the same thoughts and comments and views. So I had no issues. And as I read here and there, Erman, I agree with you. And that's different because I have never met the guy. I wish I could. That would be a dream. But yeah, I agree. And there is something else. And before we can dive into your interview, I need to say this. What I see with Bar is that many people is just judging the book by its cover. And that's unfair, to say the least. Okay? So, yeah, that's why I'm asking to you, what was the experience? And I'm glad to hear that. And, you are in my experience, you're the first person that I know, that I'm aware, who's studying under him. I'm sure you're not the only one, but perhaps I need to, go and research more. But yeah, that's why I'm asking about how was the experience with.
He's actually had quite a few students who've graduated under him and then have gone on to very good jobs. So yeah, Ben White at Clemson graduated in front of me. He's now the department chair at University of Clemson, or Clemson University. So he's now the department chair there. Stephanie Cobb, who is she's at Richmond, I believe, or Fordham. I can't remember. Stephanie Cobb is another. He also had Mark Given, who's done very well and done some excellent work. He had, I could go down the list. Diana Lipset is another who, she was at Wake Forest for a long time. Now she's at, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, now we're counting more than 4.
So yeah, there's I could go through 6 or 7 more who he's had that have finished under him and have gone on to, publish books and have good academic positions. Travis Proctor is another. He finished a little bit after me. He went on to become he's at a history department. I think he's now at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm trying to remember where Travis is. He's at Wittenberg University. Shaylee Patel is she's got a very good position at Virginia Tech in Virginia. So, and she finished just a little bit after me as well. So there's quite a few who've had good success. Jason Combs, who finished right after me as well, is at Brigham Young University, and he's done very well. There's been quite a few who've done a lot of work under Bart, and he's had a lot of a lot of people go on in the field.
So that void has been filled. Thank you, Jason. Yep. Now we're good to go. Okay, let's dive right in. So in front of you guys, you can see, these are. Can we say, Jason, these are the 2 books you have published so far in your career?
That's
and right. I'm trying to find a way to state this. This has sent some waves. I'm not sure if I'm putting it right, but I mean, Jason, and let me say this. Paul and the Resurrection of Paul is the 2nd volume sequel from the idea of Israel. So I understand you might say, well, we need to get those 2 books. Yes, go ahead and go to Amazon and get those books. I'm saving money to get those books because there is important scholarship here. And I've been listening to you and some other podcasts that you've been doing about this book and the idea of Israel. So my first question to you, Jason, is a very basic one for our Spanish people who just don't know about you, your scholarship, what's your areas of interest. So my basic question to you would be, what's the argument in your book, Paul and the Resurrection? What's the subject you're dealing with and how you are making the case about the Gentiles, the Jews, Romans 9-11, restoration, eschatology, all of that includes. Just give us the basics, please.
Yeah. So the basics here are, there's been a lot of scholarship in the past about how Paul's understanding of his own mission to Gentiles, to non-Jews, how that corresponds with or works together, whether that contradicts the perspective that he gives on Israel in Romans 9-11. And then there's a whole host of other questions that come up in various passages in Paul that, there's a lot of questions about, how contradictory he might be with himself, various things. And so what I tried to do in this book is I tried to, starting with I actually build off of the foundation of the idea of Israel. This, like you said, is sort of the 2nd book, the sequel to that book. So building off of that foundation, I tried to apply a specific model to many of the passages in the Pauline epistles that have the reputation of being the most difficult to interpret, and basically showing that if we shift our view just a little bit, those passages become much clearer and much less difficult to interpret. But it requires that we have a bit of a different set of assumptions about how Paul understands certain things. And so the basics here, the basic argument is that essentially, when someone in the first century, so I start with this, and this comes from the first book, when someone in the first century, when Paul was alive, when they talked about Israel, that Israel was not synonymous with or coextensive with it. It didn't refer to exactly the same group as the word Judaios, the Greek word Judaios, which is we translate Jews or Judeans. That these two terms, these two ideas are very related, but they're not identical. And the basic explanation that I put forward is that the word Jew refers to, and pretty consistently in the first century, it tends to refer to people who are descended from or connected to the people from the kingdom of Judah in the Bible. So you had in the Old Testament, you had the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And these two kingdoms then had different fates. The northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed by Assyria. You had many people from there that were exiled. They were dispersed, deported elsewhere. And then a few other people, the Assyrians brought some new people into the land and tried to basically mix people up. And then Judah lasted longer, and about a little over a century and a half later, Judah was defeated by Babylon, and Judah ceased to be a separate independent kingdom, and many of their upper class and so on were exiled to Babylon. And my argument is that Israel could either refer to the people from the northern kingdom of Israel who were separate from Judah, or to the whole people, to all 12 tribes, which is often what it refers to, especially if someone says all Israel. And then Jew refers to people associated with the descendants of, and the people connected to what was the southern tribe of Judah. So the people who were exiled to Babylon, or some of them remained in the land, those people who were connected to Jerusalem and to the people of Judah. And they're part of this larger group of 12 tribes, of the 12 tribes of Israel, but they are not identical with the whole. So just like Hondureños are Spanish speakers, not all Spanish speakers are Hondureños, right? So this is
thank you for that.
Well, I mean, this is the difference, right?
Yeah.
So one of the mistakes that so many interpreters have made is when they've read Paul, when he says Israel, they have assumed that he just means the Jews. But this would be like hearing, oh, they're Hispanic. Well, they must be from Spain. This is not the same, right? Someone is Hispanic, they speak Spanish, but they may be from Mexico or, Honduras or wherever. Not everybody's from Spain, but people who are from Spain are also Hispanic, right? They're Spanish speakers. So what he does when he's referring to Israel is I argue is when he's referring to Israel, he tends to be referring to the whole people. And especially in Romans 11:26, when he says, and thus all Israel will be saved. When he says all Israel, this is consistently in other literature of the era, his contemporaries and people before him. This is consistently a way of referring to all 12 tribes, both Jews and the rest of Israel. And so once you have that as a foundation, you can start to go back through a lot of his letters, and a lot more makes sense. And basically what I argue is Paul's larger gospel message is all about what he sees as the fulfillment of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. And the Hebrew prophets promised that all of Israel would one day be restored by God. Well, all of Israel includes Jews, and it also includes the other people from the northern part of Israel who are not Jews, but they are Israelites. So you have Jewish Israelites, and then you have non-Jewish Israelites. And when the prophets promise that all 12 tribes will be restored one day, and that God will change their hearts and give them a new heart and a new spirit, that he will write his Torah on their hearts and all of these other things, that is promised to this larger group, of whom many never returned from exile, and many are, presumably out there, is the idea that Paul's operating with. And Paul believes that the death and resurrection of Jesus has initiated this promised restoration. And then when he's looking around and he's seeing people who are not Jews, these are Gentile people, they're uncircumcised men who are suddenly showing that they have received the gift of the Spirit by through Jesus. He comes to this idea that an explanation that many of the people from Israel, when they were scattered among the various nations, they did what immigrants do in nations. Most immigrants, when they go to a new nation, they, the second and third generation, they marry people from those nations.
Yeah.
And then before too long, they're mixed in, they're mixed people. I mean, this is the history, one side of my family came from mestizos, right? I mean, so this was Spaniards mixing with natives in Mexico when they arrived. It's the same basic thing. And basically what he argues is that these people, that a large portion of Israel mixed among the nations, intermarried among the nations, and over the past 800 years until his day, these people just became part of the nations.
Yeah.
And so for God to fulfill his promises to those parts of Israel, the thing that is required then is for people from those nations to be incorporated into the people of God and essentially made into Israelites by the promise of the new heart and the new spirit and the Torah written on the heart and all of these promises of the prophets, that this is actually how God is restoring the whole people of Israel. So you have Jews and then those from the nations where all of Israel was scattered. They come together in Jesus, in Christ, and through receiving the Spirit, that this becomes for Paul the means of the way that all Israel is to be saved. And so what this means is that his Gentile mission, so his preaching the gospel to non-Jews, is not separate from his hopes for Israel, but he sees these two things as very much related, because in order for all of Israel to be saved, you have to have the people from the nations where some of Israel was scattered and assimilated to come in as well. And so by unifying them with Jewish believers in Jesus, you are getting the whole people of Israel restored in a way that he sees as fulfilling the promises of the prophets. So this is the basic argument of Paul in the resurrection of Israel, to where the reason it's called the resurrection of Israel is he sees part of Israel as having a big part of Israel as having gone out and essentially ethnically died.
Mm-hmm.
They cease to be an ethnic people among the nations. And then they are resurrected as the people of Israel from those nations in a new way through receiving the Spirit. And, he's reading Ezekiel 37, for example, which is the valley of the dry bones, as exactly this, that they go out and they die ethnically among the nations. And now the people is being resurrected from that ethnic death to become a new ethnos, a new ethnic group of this restored Israel. And so Israel actually, in some sense, imitates Jesus in dying ethnically and then rising from the dead through the Spirit of Jesus. So the Messiah does this, and then the Messiah resurrects the people in this way. So this is the basic argument of the book. And there's a lot of other implications about how we read lots of passages that go from there. But this is the basic explanation of what I'm trying to do in the book and trying to explain.
Okay. Yeah. And that's the thing, because I remember listening to you and Matthew Bates in their podcast, the On-Script podcast. And you're touching on several Old Testament passages, to be more specific. Now, something that really caught my attention was the one on Genesis where Jacob laying in his bed, and Joseph is bringing his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And the way you explained that, connecting that chapter, because you said that's the only part outside Paul's the fullness of the Gentiles, that's the only Old Testament passage that you can find that phrase. So how do you think there is a my goodness, this is a lot of too much here, but you think Paul I don't know if I could go so far to ask you this, but because we can't get into the author's mind, he's dead, long time dead. So, but do you think it's plausible, or it's quite sound exegesis to say, hey, Paul has Genesis 49, that Jacob incident episode, in his mind when he's talking about the Gentiles being grafted in the the white olive, in Romans 9 through 11? Do you think that's in Paul's mind? Do we have evidence to talk about that, or that's reading too much?
So yes, I think we do have evidence of this.
Okay,
so
that's good.
So in that passage, which is Genesis 48, in that passage in Genesis 48:19, when he crosses his arms and he blesses the sons of Jacob, what he says about Ephraim, the younger son of the younger son of Joseph, what he says about Ephraim is, I know that the older son, I know that Manasseh he's the older. I know my son. I know.
I know.
He too will become a people, and he will be great, but his brother will be greater than he. And then the concluding line of Genesis 48:19 is, it says, and his seed will become the fullness of the nations.
Wow.
Or the fullness of the Gentiles is another way to translate that. This is in Hebrew, this is Maloha Goyim, which the normal way of translating that phrase into Greek would sound something like ta pleramaton ethnon. Now, in the actual Greek Bible that we tend to use, the various versions of the Septuagint that we have, it usually says plethe ton ethnon, which is, it harmonizes that passage in Greek with Genesis 17, with God's promise to Abraham. But that's not actually what the Hebrew says. When Paul in Romans 11:25 concludes, he comes to conclude the olive tree metaphor. So when he explains about Gentiles being grafted into the tree and becoming part of the tree, he says, now, I don't want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, lest you be wise in your own eyes, that a part of Israel has become hardened, or Israel has become hardened for a portion of time. It's not clear which one he means there. Until, and then he says this very interesting thing, until ta pleramaton ethnon, until they come in.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the same phrase that you would expect from a very literal, exact translation of what the Hebrew of Genesis 48:19 is. And that is the only place in any literature or any passage prior to Romans that we see that phrase. This is a very unusual phrase, the fullness of the nations. And for that phrase to appear only in those two places, I think is very significant. And he says, until the fullness of the nations comes in. And then after he says, after the fullness of the nations comes in, the next word, or the next phrase, is kai hutos, which is in Greek, it's a way of saying, and in this way, or and thus, all Israel, pas Yisrael, will be saved.
Yeah.
So what he then says, if we read this very carefully, is the fullness of the nations, which according to Genesis 48:19 is associated with the seed of Ephraim, has to come in. Well, into what? Well, presumably into the tree that he was just talking about, in order for all Israel to be saved. Which, if we then connect that with Ephraim, as his phrase would suggest, we realize that Israel, all Israel, is not all until both Judah and Ephraim, which is the chief of the northern tribes, the kings of the northern tribes came from Ephraim. Until both Judah and Ephraim are present, you do not have all Israel. So if the promise is for the salvation of all Israel, then you have to have the fullness of the nations, because Ephraim became the fullness of the nations, just as was promised. So I think there's a very strong connection there. And even if you wanted to argue and say, well, that's just one phrase, that's too much to hang on one phrase. Well, the Romans 9-11 begins, the argument more or less begins when Paul says that God is revealing himself. He has chosen us, whom he has chosen from both Jews and Gentiles. And then he cites Hosea chapter 1, or chapter 2 verse 1, or 1 verse 9, depending on whether you're reading the Hebrew or English or Spanish version. But he cites Hosea, where Hosea promises, I will call those who are not my people, my people.
Yeah.
Right? Well, the lo ami is about a specific people. That is a promise to a specific group, specifically to the northern tribes of Israel. And it actually explicitly, in several places in Hosea, focuses on Ephraim as the chief of the northern tribes of Israel. Yep. So he begins this by connecting the salvation of the nations and the inclusion of the nations in the people of God with Hosea's promise to the northern kingdom of Israel, who Hosea says, you are not my people. Well, what does not my people mean if not no longer Israel, right? You're no longer Israel. You are just like the nations. You are now among the nations, and you will be treated as them. But one day I will say to those who are not my people, well, who are not my people? Paul understands not my people, and he says, this is happening with Gentiles. They are not God's people. Yeah. And now they are being called God's people again. And who is this promise made to? To the northern tribes, to the northern kingdom of Israel. This is not a promise to the southern tribes, because the southern tribes were never divorced the way that the northern tribes were. The southern tribes were never told, lo ami, not my people. The northern kingdom was. Those tribes were. And so now what he says is both from Jews and Gentiles. Why from Gentiles? Because Gentiles are the way that God brings in those who are not my people. And who is not my people? That is the people who became part of, at least not my people, is the rest of Israel. So to bring in the rest of Israel, you bring in not my people, that is Gentiles. And now you unite them with Jews, and you have the whole people. So this is in Romans 9. That's the first frame. And in the final frame of Romans 11, you get the same idea repeated again. It's just very, very hard for me. Like, this is one of those things, I think, once you see it, it's very, very hard to unsee it. And it's very, very hard. Like, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, it explains what Paul's doing in Romans 9-11 better than any other alternative, better than any other option. And suddenly so much makes so much more sense.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's a lot of in there, but there are some other things that you deal there, and it's the Israel's infidelity and God's fidelity. I remember you saying that the whole Old Testament Hebrew Bible, it's a record of how God has been dealing with this pattern in the nation of Israel. And this is, I'm not sure this is let me see where I am angling here my question. Because page after page we read the pattern. Israel rebels against God. He allows punishment in whatever way or shape or form he decides to let it go in. But it's always in that pattern that he is leaving some, remnant to start all over again. And you said that pattern, Israel's infidelity and God's fidelity, is somehow attested or what's the word? Come alive when the Gentiles are becoming part of the family. And this has to do with the ethnocentricity. That's the term that you guys use. And do we have, because I'm not sure if this is something, because I need to be very careful on formulating this question. We are human beings, so we can fail, right? We can sin, we can rebel, we can do that. Fine. Now, do you think at some moment Israel reached some sort of, pride, dangerous pride on that ethnocentricity of there as a nation? And Paul is coming in here, like, rattling their cages, because Paul, his theology has been heavily affected by this encounter with the Messiah. According to him, his whole theology has changed. He is like reevaluating. I'm not sure if evolved, but most of the worldview in its time, its context, in light of the Christ event. So do you think, but this is my question, do you think Paul, in his argument, is trying to admonish the Israelites on their pride, with their ethnocentricity, by appealing to this mystery that the fullness of the Gentiles have not been completed? Or do we have something even greater than that, because it's a mystery?
Yeah, I think it's something more than that. So I don't think that Paul's primary critique here of Jews, or of say non-believing Jews, or of the rest of Israel or whatnot, I don't think that his critique is that they've been ethnocentric or racist or anything like that. I don't think that's what he's claiming. I do think he is trying to explain how Gentile people are now to be included in this way, which is, hard to explain from his end. I mean, you have in Genesis, you have the covenant is made with Abraham, and circumcision is very important to the covenant. So, in that case, he has to explain why it is that circumcision of the body, of the flesh, is not central to being a part of the people of God anymore, or at least that's what he's arguing, right? So that he has to explain, and that's not so much about ethnocentricity as it is explaining the nature of what he sees as the new covenant. He's trying to explain how the circumcision of the heart is really what makes a person an Israelite in this renewed, restored people, and that the circumcision of the flesh doesn't actually change a person's heart or guarantee that a person will do what's right, and that what really matters is the change of heart. So, he makes that case, but for people who are, committed to a traditional reading in his day, to a traditional reading of say Genesis 17, it would be very hard to accept this. So he's much more interested in dealing with that than he is with an idea that there is some sort of ethnocentrism to that. And in some sense, I mean, whatever ethnocentrism other Jews might have had in that day, in some ways, Paul, I think, shares the exact same ethnocentrism, because he doesn't say, oh, well, it's not about having one people who's, worshiping one God or anything anymore. It's just, it's open to everybody. We're just going to be very inclusive, and whoever, is out there, we just accept you. However, this is not what he says. Instead, he is establishing ecclesia, right? Ecclesia. He is establishing these churches, these places where iglesias, where he where these are groups that have clear boundaries, and if you don't behave and live and act in certain ways and worship the God of Israel in specific ways, and only worship the God of Israel, then you're not a part of this people. So he retains the same kind of exclusivity that you see in any other Jewish group of his day. And in some ways, he's probably more exclusive than many. But what he's done is he argues that certain Gentiles who receive the Spirit essentially become ethnically they're not just ethically transformed. They're not just spiritually transformed. They become a new ethnos. They become a new ethnic group. They become a member of a new people. So they receive a different citizenship. And whereas they once were Scythian or Greek or, Parthian or whatever, and, there's something else, now they are a part of the people of Israel, and they are a different ethnos. They are a different people. So he himself is very ethnocentric, but he believes that certain people, by receiving the Spirit of Jesus, become a new ethnos. They become a new race or a new ethnic group. And so they're transformed inside out and thoroughly. They become a completely different person. And so he's not less ethnocentric. It's just a matter of what the boundaries of the ethnos or what the boundaries of the people actually are.
Okay. Now, I'm going to introduce a theory, okay? Because I mean, your first book, The Idea of Israel, in subtitle goes like a new theory of people exile and Israelite identity. So I'm going to introduce a new theory, and I want you to give me your take on that, okay? You can tell me if I'm wrong, dead wrong, or we'll see, okay? So you are dealing with the Spirit. People is receiving the Spirit. God sends the Spirit. They are a new ethnos, as you said. You're talking about the resurrection. You're talking about exile, right? So you're dealing with all of these motifs in this narrative. Now, here's my theory, Jason, to you. When you see those elements in Paul, what do you think about Paul having in his mind new creation, but he's thinking of Adam?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, he says so.
Okay. Thank you.
Right? Yeah, he says so. I mean, he says, that
I'm not that crazy. Then.
All humanity he kind of divides, instead of dividing humanity into Jews and Gentiles exactly, he divides humanity in Adam and in Christ.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And so when people come into Christ, they are becoming this new kind of person. So on the one hand, I argue in this book that he sees that as Israel, that the renewed people is the people of Israel. The people in Christ are the renewed people of Israel that was promised by the prophets. Now, Jews also, even non-believing Jews, are ex-Israel. They're from Israel, right? They are, in that sense, they're Israelites as well. And he hopes that all of them come into Christ, into this restored, renewed people of Israel. But it's not just that, this is an Israel that's going to, go back to the land and, live as a nation state or something like this. He sees this as tied and connected to another set of very large promises in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. Specifically, Abraham, when he receives the promise from God initially, God says, go outside and look at the stars.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my
Abraham.
God. Yeah.
And he says, thus or so will your seed be.
So
right?
Yeah.
But this is not just about number. This is not, this is how many your seed will be. Your seed will be as many as the stars. He could have said that, right? This is a matter of quality as well as number, because he then goes to the sand of the seashore for number. But for the stars, this is a qualitative promise that your seed will be like the stars, as in his seed will become fully, they will receive eternal life. Like the stars they don't move, they don't change, and so on. His seed will be like that. And then when you get to Exodus and the people are invited to come up onto the mountain in Exodus chapter 19, and then they don't come back up onto the mountain, or they don't come up onto the mountain, but Moses does. When Moses goes up onto the mountain, when he comes down, his face glows like a star, right? He receives this new, like a taste of this new promise. And the whole thing that we see with Israel in the Old Testament, the God of Israel does not have, the Lord does not have a goddess, according to the Torah, that is in heaven with him, that is his divine partner. Instead, Israel is supposed to be that divine partner. He is making Israel into a divine partner for himself.
Wow.
But Israel doesn't really cooperate, right?
Mm.
They come to the mountain and they don't go up. And they worship the golden calf, and they chicken out when it comes to the land, and they all of these things, right? Israel just never quite gets there. But the promise of the prophets is that Israel will receive this inheritance at some point. And so for Paul, coming into Christ is not just about being a new nation, but the new nation is itself this divine, eternal life having divinized entity that is to be the wife, the bride of the God of Israel.
Yeah.
Right. So then those who come into Christ, they receive a glory that is like the glory that Adam had before the fall. Right. So they and even exceeding that, because it's permanent. So the idea then is that they become a second Adam. That Israel is set up to be a second Adam, and is set up to be, with respect to God, what, say, Eve is set up to be with respect to Adam in the garden. So this is all tied together for Paul, and this is why he uses bridal imagery. And this is why he uses temple imagery. This is how he connects the Adam and Israel stuff, which is connected multiple times in Romans, where Israel and Adam are kind of the stories of Adam in the garden and Israel in the wilderness, or Israel at Sinai, are interpreted together multiple times in Paul. I think this is why, is he's doing all of this, that this is the divine miracle of making, of taking fleshly human beings and transforming fleshly human beings into a divine people who share the divine nature, who are spirit, they're pneumatikoi, they're spiritual in the sense of having this inheritance to be with God and to be godlike in some sense. So this is all a part of that. And he sees this as all woven together in the promises to Abraham and then to Israel and so on in the prophets. And he sees this as what Jesus' death and resurrection ultimately facilitates, as those who are in Christ receive Jesus' undying eternal spirit that then teaches us to live in this new divine way.
New divine, yeah. Jason, I don't get to hear this in church. Why is that? Why is that?
I don't know.
Why do we miss so much? I mean,
I don't know. If I would very much like it if these sorts of things were the sorts of things that were discussed in church. And the thing is, in many of the church fathers, in many of the older church writings from the first centuries of the church, they are discussing many of these sorts of things. I mean, you see discussions of what the Greek fathers call theosis. Becoming sharers of the divine nature. You see, the Catholic mystics talking about these sorts of things. You see Protestant mystics talking about these sorts of things, but it's not the parts that end up getting emphasized in sort of everyday church in the modern world. And I do think that there's some that's sad in some ways, because I think that this is very much central to this is unfortunate, because I think this is very much central to what the basic. I mean, I think this is fairly basic stuff when it comes to understanding the New Testament and understanding what the gospel is doing.
Yeah, that's why. Oh my goodness, this. Jesus, he went and gathered 12 disciples, 12 apostles. Like right away, as a reader, even if I'm as a layman, okay, that kind of sticks in your with your mind, because you're reading, you have that number right here in your mind, and that instantaneously just harkens back to the 12 tribes of Israel. So what I am understanding of all what you're saying now, because I read Resurrection, and for some weird reason, and I'm being honest here, for some weird reason, my first reaction, I'm just thinking apocalyptically. But the way you are explaining the resurrection of Israel, do you include that in the whole image, the greater picture, the big picture? And furthermore, when Paul says the mystery, why is that even a mystery? I mean, I'm not saying like all the answers, but hey, why a mystery? So that's why I'm thinking apocalyptically. Do you think that's right? Am I wrong?
Yes, I think so. Mystery language there is apocalyptic language. So apocalyptic is apocalypse. Just is a Greek word for revelation, to have something unveiled, right?
Yeah.
To have something revealed. And what is happening in these discussions is very much about God revealing something. And what Paul is arguing when he says that this is a revelation, or when he says that this is a mystery, he is specifically referring to this as a revelation from God of something that was previously hidden. So T.J. Lang did a book on this a few years back.
Benjamin Ladd?
What's that?
Benjamin Ladd?
No, T.J. Lang. So Lang. He did a book on this about probably 15 years ago now, where he explains that the word mystery that Paul uses here, the way that word tends to be used in similar writings, is that a mystery isn't something that is unknowable. It's not like a novella, right? It's not that. It's a it refers to something that was once previously hidden, but now can be known. And so what Paul is explaining is that nobody would have, reading the prophets, looking forward and listening to the prophets centuries earlier, would have said, oh, this is about Gentiles becoming Israelites in the future. But now, looking back at those prophecies and seeing how this works through the lenses of what's happening and through understanding the death and resurrection of Jesus, you can see that this was God's plan all along. And that's what Paul means by saying that something is a mystery, is that this is a revelation of God's plan that was previously not understood, that now is more fully understood. That's what that means. And so he's just saying that this is something that we can understand now that we're seeing it.
Yeah, I was trying to. Okay, my screen just got free stop. You're still listening to me, right? You can see me on the screen.
I can still see you, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, so some demon entered into my computer now. Okay, so All right, so let's bring this conversation to an end, because I just want to value your time. Now you talk about Torah, God, and the end of Torah in your book. It's something that I could find there. What exactly do you mean, like the end of Torah? Because for many of us, Protestants, if I can put it that way, we have developed some what's the word? We have developed some kind of antagonistic view of Torah, like it's something that we shouldn't follow, and Paul was against it, you know. But when you say God and the end of Torah, what exactly you are arguing in there? Does that include the whole argument of Paul? Is that like the climax of Paul in the resurrection? What exactly you are aiming at with that phrase?
So the basic idea here is that Paul, when he in Romans 10, one of the most difficult passages in the Pauline epistles, in the Pauline letters, is when Paul says that Christ, basically, Christ is the end of the law for all who believe, or the end of the Torah for all who believe. And this is a very difficult verse to explain what he means. And there's been a number of different attempts made to explain what this means. My explanation is essentially twofold. First of all, do you know what the last sentence of the Torah actually is?
The last sentence.
Yes, the last sentence of Deuteronomy, what it says.
You got me.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Nobody remembers this. Nobody remembers this. And
but
this
you
is
talk about the last 4 chapters of Deuteronomy being very important in Paul's argument, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the last chapters of Deuteronomy are critically important.
Critical,
And the last sentence in Deuteronomy, the main clause of the last sentence says this: since that day, no prophet like Moses has arisen in Israel.
Wow, there you go.
Since that day, no prophet like Moses has arisen in Israel. Now, here's the really funny part.
Okay.
Is the word for arisen in that line in Greek is the same word that's used in the New Testament to refer to the resurrection. So and I lost you on the screen, so I hope we're still going. So the basic idea here is that when Paul says Christ is the end of the Torah, he is saying that Christ is the prophet like Moses who was raised from the dead, who has arisen in Israel, and is therefore the fulfillment of that very statement. And he's the one who essentially brings the Torah to the very last thing that the Torah points to, that the Torah ends by pointing to a prophet like Moses who will arise, who Paul understands will be raised up, will be resurrected. And once you have that happen, this is then the essence of, this is what the Torah is promising and pointing to and highlighting all along. And so Christ then is the end of the Torah in that respect. Beyond that, though, that also makes Christ the goal to which the Torah is aiming and trying to lead people. So the Torah becomes the thing that points to and leads to Jesus, and Jesus is the goal to which the Torah is pointing, even in its very last verse. And so then once you have that, you can then start to read the rest of Romans 10 and understand what he's doing with a lot of the rest of it, to where as the end of the Torah, Christ is the thing that the Torah was pointing to as the means by which Israel would become a people who please God
Mhm.
and thereby fulfill what the Torah was designed in the first place to lead to. So the Torah is designed to testify to lead to Christ, who then gives the people who follow him the transformation to do justice and do the things that the Torah requires that people do in order to please God in a way that the Torah could not. And so the Torah is unable to make people do what it tells them to do. It's an external law.
Yeah.
It can demonstrate that this is the right thing to do, and you are guilty for not having done these things. It's able to do that. It's able to reveal and to judge. But what it cannot do is transform, and it cannot give life. This is what he says in Galatians chapter 3. If a Torah had been given that could make alive, that could bring life, then there would be no need, for the gospel, for Christ to do what he did. But instead, what you need in order to fulfill the Torah is the Spirit that Christ had as the one who fulfills the Torah. Once you have Christ's Spirit, now the things that the Torah teaches are things that are transformed and have become a part of who you are, such that now, and this is the final part in which this is the end of the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Now you don't need those instructions as a mature individual. You don't need someone to keep slapping your hand for not doing the right thing, because you're going to keep doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So my children, I've got 2 young children. When they do things that are wrong, I'm there to guide them in ways to teach them to do differently. And one of the ways that I often do that is, I will say, we don't do this, right? No. Stop. No, we don't do this. We don't do that. The goal of raising children is to get it to where by the time they're older, it never occurs to them that they would do this anymore, because that has become a part of who they are. No, we do not roll around on the bathroom floor, right? We don't do this. And when you get to be older, that's just not even something you would consider doing. Right? It nauseates you to think about, it makes you sick to think about even doing it, because that's become a part of who you are. And so once they're at that age and they're mature, they no longer need me there to say, hey, no, we stop rolling around on the bathroom floor. They're old enough that they don't need it. Right.
Yeah.
And so what Paul is saying is, for those who have the Spirit of Christ, the law, the very things that the law is there to teach you to do, and to teach you to be like, and to make you to tell you what it is that pleases God. Those very things have now, through the Spirit, become a part of who you are. You are now a part of that. And as you become mature, you no longer even need the Torah to teach you those things, because that is just who you are. You are a person who loves God and loves your neighbor the way that you're supposed to. You are a person who just does the things that the Torah was designed to teach. And so at that point, you no longer actually need the thing that was there to teach you before you had the maturity that comes by receiving the Spirit. So Christ is the end of the Torah, in that he is the one to whom the Torah points in its very last moment. The very last thing at the very end of the Torah that it says, it's talking about the one who is raised, who is the prophet like Moses. And what is that person there to do? He's there to make it so that we no longer need the Torah outside of us, because we have it inside of us. And one last example, we have speed limits. When you're driving a car, there's a sign that says, do not drive faster than this. Why? Because it would be unsafe to go too fast. So they put a number there that say, drive this fast. Or slower, right? And then nobody actually does it. Right? Everybody just drives, 10 kilometers per hour faster, 15 kilometers per hour faster. All of a sudden you have that, right?
Speed of light.
Right? Suddenly people are driving. But here's the thing. If everybody just just naturally drove a safe speed, you would no longer need there to be speed limit signs on the side of the road.
That's right.
Or if you had cars that were auto driving that just drove safely, you would no longer need the external speed limit sign, because the speed limit is now internal to the programming of the car. And this is what Paul says has happened to those who have the Spirit of Christ, is that their internal programming has taken on the essence of what the Torah externally is there to teach. And so now, when you're there and when you are walking by the Spirit, the Torah is no longer, you have reached the end of the Torah. You have reached the point where the Torah is no longer needed as a teacher, because you have internalized everything that it is. So that's what this is about. My whole chapter on that in the book is explaining how this all works out, and how Paul goes there in Romans 10 and in Galatians 3, and then how that works out as a fulfillment of the prophets. But yeah, I think this is very important to understand, because he is not opposing the Torah in any way. He is explaining how the Torah is, and what the Torah teaches is to be fulfilled and must be fulfilled by those who have the Spirit.
Thank you. Yeah. I know of something that you will never say to the children not to do, is playing chess.
That's true. My 5-year-old and my 4-year-old are playing a bunch of chess.
You posted something about you having to obsess, like, and this is something very putting aside, it's a sidebar, more of a sidebar. But because I'm studying psychology, so I'm very interested in how the kid from the first years and on, how they can develop their abilities, and what are the reasons in exercising influence on what they do, how they do it, how they think, whatever. So tell me something. Is it true that playing chess is a good tool to develop their mental capacities, their cognitive skills? Is that right? Is that a thing? I mean, is that for real?
It is. Yeah, I think it's actually very helpful.
Okay.
There are several reasons for that. So when you play chess, if you learn to play chess well, you have to learn to see possibilities and contingencies for the future. So you learn to plan.
Okay.
And to have a plan of going about things, but you also have to be flexible in how you think, to where I say, okay, if I move here, then he may do this, or he may do this, or he may do this, and then I have to think about what the possibilities of that are. So you have to learn to think in terms of contingency, and different possibilities for the future. So that's one thing. Another thing is that you also have to learn to think empathetically, because you have to learn to think from the other person's perspective. So when you're playing against someone else, you actually have to start to think about, well, if I were that person, here's how I would be thinking about this. And then sometimes you get surprised and you realize that the other person was thinking something that you didn't see. And then you learn from that. Yeah. And so you learn to think like another person and to respect another person in that way. And then you're just learning I think any sort of thing where you're learning patterns and pattern recognition tends to be helpful. So those are 3-4 things that I think are very helpful in terms of learning chess. And there are a variety of things that my children, I decided as soon as as I knew I was going to have children, I decided that there are certain things that they just have to learn, partly for their benefits in how they think in other ways. One was chess. Another, and some people may be offended by this, but it's not for the purpose of learning to do this, to risk a lot of money. But I want them to learn the basics of poker, so that they learn how to handle statistics and how to handle basic probability. And again, how to think like another person in the context of uncertainty and what that person might be thinking and all of this. This teaches you how to think and also how to relate to others in certain ways that shape you as a person. And I think certain board games and certain card games and things like that can help with that. And similarly, they have to learn that there are certain just other skills that they have to learn. They have to, certain physical training and things that I just think are important. If we are undisciplined with our bodies, then a lot of times our minds get less sharp as well. So I think it's my girls play a lot of soccer. I'm coaching them in soccer. And we run around a lot. We do a lot of pull-ups and a lot of different things that I want them to be strong in a lot of different ways. And all of this is about becoming the sharpest instrument that we can be, to apply to the areas of life that really matter.
Yeah. From 1 to 10, how good are you as a surfer?
As a surfer?
Yes. Because
I'll give myself a 2. Dos.
There you go.
Yeah. I'll give myself a 2. My brother-in-law, I would give about an 8, maybe a 7 or an 8, probably 7 now.
He's a pro. What?
Well, he broke his neck actually a few years ago, and but before that he was competitive. He was a competitive surfer, and then since then he's surfed less. But he's still, actually, now that he's recovered, he's still a very good surfer and can handle himself. And he's taught me some, but I'm just not very good. I can get up on the board and ride a wave for a little bit, but I'm not doing any carving or anything like that. If I stand up, if I stand up for a few seconds on a surf outing, then I feel like I've done very well. So I'll give myself a 2.
I never tried that, so I think I would die myself. Jason, before letting go, I need to ask you this. Just getting back to to your book, as you well know, every scholar and their work is always being reviewed, criticized, evaluated, vetted by other professionals. So have you faced, and if so, have you faced any real criticism so far about your books? And how have you dealt with those criticisms?
I think so far there hasn't been a ton. I mean, scholarship tends to move very slowly.
Okay.
It takes a while for people to read a new book, and then it takes even longer for their reactions and responses for that book to come out, and for that to start manifesting in different literature in their own research and that sort of thing. There was a set of 4 reviews that was published at the end of last year, of which I actually was given the opportunity to respond to those.
Sure.
Of those, one of them was more critical than it was. 3 of them were mostly complimentary of this, and were persuaded by much of the argument. There was one that was very much more critical, and the critiques in that had more to do with concerns that we might be able to say that Paul meant anything at all. This was a much more of a metacritical kind of argument about, it took issue with the fact that I had said that there were better ways of reading Paul than others. And it was, that other people had, that certain readings of Paul were wrong. And it was like, well, who are we to say which readings are right or wrong? We can't really do that. What my take on that is that if that's where a scholar is coming from, that we can't really establish more right or more wrong readings, then that scholar is just really not doing the same sorts of things that I and I think most other scholars are doing, where we're trying to understand what these texts actually mean. And if we're trying to understand what these texts say on their own terms, then that means we have to think that there are better and worse ways to read these texts. And this person also was very concerned about potential implications of my book for there was a lot of discussion about the modern state of, or you've got the questions about modern Israel and modern Jewish Christian, modern Jewish Christian relations and things like this. That this was much more of the focus of that review, and it was not really focused on whether or not my argument holds up historically and in terms of the text. So I really didn't have a whole lot to do in terms of thinking about responding to that, because it's that, again, like I said, that scholar and that particular type of response is just they're doing a different kind of scholarship than I am, and if that's what they want to choose to do, then that's perfectly fine. But that's not that's not what I'm doing. Other than that, I mean, I'm still waiting on what the really large critiques of things are going to be. But in another 3 or 4 years, I think I'll have a good sense of how everybody's been reading it.
Yeah, and we wish you the best. I mean, I think you, as a scholar, you have no issues. I mean, you scholars are trained to cope with criticism, but real informed criticism, right?
Right.
I mean, that's something you have no. I mean, it doesn't bother you, like, as long as it's something very informed, scholarly in tone. So,
well, and at the end of the day, there's only so much that I can, like, I have a limited view, right? I can't see
yeah,
everything. I'm sitting in one place and I can only see one way. If I'm not in contact and conversation with other people who can help me identify my own blind spots. And then once I recognize that those are blind spots by listening to others, then my vision and my view can expand. And the only way that happens is through critique and through others coming along and saying, I just don't think you got this part right. And then I can hopefully learn from that. That's the thing, is that this is not about me. This is about learning, and not about me showing, that I'm right or anything else. It's about working together to try to find the best possible understanding of things that I think are more important than all of us, or than any one of us, I should say.
And this is something I asked Mark Nanos in the previous interview. Do you think Paul was a controversial guy? And he said, let me tell you what he said. He said, let me tell you one word. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, frankly, Paul was hard to get along with. I think there's
also said that. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of evidence for that. I mean, Paul was initially, recruited to do the work according to Acts. He's recruited to do certain work by Barnabas, and then before too long, they aren't traveling together because they had a major fight. They had a significant argument, and so they split. And then Paul ends up with other people, and then some other people end up leaving him later on. And I think, then certain churches, you read Galatians and you see, there's,
you get the snip.
Yeah. Nothing is, nothing is super smooth or straightforward. I think he's a very passionate man who is completely willing to pick a fight and to stand on principle. And that's going to result in certain level of controversy. But the thing I think everybody, regardless of what you think of Paul in other respects, I think the man deserves our respect and admiration for the degree to which he put his money where his mouth was, and he paid to the last penny for everything that he said and everything. This is a man who was beaten multiple times. You listen to what he says in 2 Corinthians and, read Acts, where, he's beaten with rods multiple times. He gets 39 lashes 5 different times. He's shipwrecked multiple times. He's stoned until they thought he was dead. Wow. Most people are not going to be willing to put their money where their mouth is to that level. And this is a man who decided that this was something that was worth paying that price for. And he paid with his own life to the last penny. And, I think that if nothing else, regardless of what you think about the man, and, he was very controversial. I think he was hard to get along with, but this is a guy who absolutely was willing to pay he owed to the last penny.
Yeah, you think the Nero tradition that he was beheaded during Nero, it's true? It holds up historically? It was more of a tradition.
I don't know. I don't think there's any reason to think that it's false.
Okay.
I think the fact that Acts leaves off where it does, where he's hanging out in Rome for a couple of years, and then it's just like, and he was able to do this for a couple of years, and then, you know, without any hindrance or whatever. And of course,
And
as readers, many of us are going, what happened after those couple of years?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Hey, we're missing something here.
Why would you leave off here? And I think the most logical answer, the most obvious answer is the last thing that happens is not something that actually helps the argument of Acts.
Yeah.
Right. Acts all along is trying to present this as a, like, this is not about overthrowing Rome. This is not, and, you know, he leaves off and he's like, look, even in the midst of Rome, they're kind of giving him freedom. They're letting him do their thing.
Yeah.
For a couple of years. And then you go, well, then what? Well, you know, he was formally executed at the orders of the Caesar.
Hey, we got an actor here, voice actor, so he's doing
right. So I mean, that's the most likely,
you
know, thing I think that happened at the end of Acts, that Acts is intentionally eliding, because again, we can just stop before that, and it's the story works. And so given that, and given that the tradition exists, I think we'd have to have counter evidence to displace that. I think that's a strong null hypothesis. And I think we would need to have good counter evidence to have some other hypothesis supersede it. And I don't think we're ever going to have that evidence.
So Jason, this is for sure, definitely, I promise, the last question. What's in the hopper? What you got for your next projects? What you need to be aware about your work? What you're doing?
I'm working on several. One is actually, I've decided for after doing so much work on these books, and, you know, very, very detailed, close, hard work.
That I break in, they interrupt you. These two books they're coming from your dissertation. Am I right?
Idea of Israel was, it was a revision of material in my dissertation.
Okay.
There's a decent amount of changes and improvements and some restructuring to make it significantly better. The book on Paul, the Paul and the Resurrection of Israel, that book, two of the chapters are basically from the dissertation, and then the rest of that material was written new for that book. So, so it's got, you know, like 25% or 20% or so of that book is from the dissertation, and the rest is new. So similar, but not exactly the same. But after doing all that work for so long, so closely, I needed a palate cleanser, something to do that would be a little bit just something different. And so I'm working on a book on the English author C.S. Lewis and his use of scripture, of Christian scripture in his writings. So I'm doing a project on that, and then I'm also working on getting these books sort of boiled down for a more educated layperson audience. These are academic monographs. I tried to make them as readable and accessible as possible, and, you know, many, you know, interested and educated lay readers have read them so far and seem to find them readable. But I want to write something that is more accessible to, you know, someone from primary school, or, you know, someone from, you know, high school who could just pick it up and read it easily. So I'm going to try to do something. I'm working on something along those lines, and then finally, I'm about to sign a contract for a specific kind of commentary on the Book of Romans. So I'm going to develop that and do some work on that. But that's sort of the third down the line with respect to those big ones.
We can know the publisher.
Yep.
Yeah.
So so I've not signed the papers yet. So I'm not fully divulging that just yet. But that's where I'm going.
Thank you. Just giving the plug here. That's Jason Staples' website. You can go there and just be, you know, he's keeping up there all the info, his episode, podcast, books, everything. So you can catch up in there with his scholarship, his work, and updates. Also, I'll be putting down there in the comments, because we got Jason Staples Academia.edu website. So you can go ahead and check out his work, some of the work and papers that he's done over the years, and his book out as well. So Jason, thank you so much. I appreciate this conversation. I like more of I know I told you it's an interview, but I'm a more of a conversation guy. I don't like the robotic, questions answer. I think it's better to have a conversation, and I hope that's being the nature of this time here. So thank you so much. Any last comments that you may have for the audience, the Spanish audience, to be more specific?
I'll avoid embarrassing myself too much at the moment, but
No. Okay.
Yeah. Very grateful for the chance to talk, and gracias.
There you go. You got Jason Staples speaking Spanish. Good. We need more academics speaking Spanish.
Very true.
So thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Until the next time. Bye now.